Today we continue on with our NHL offseason plan series. We're taking a step back to look at the newly eliminated Edmonton Oilers, the 11th place team from the regular season. What should we expect? What kind of reaction will we get after being eliminated in the conference final? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're examining the Edmonton Oilers and their off-season plans. I honestly think the Oilers will be a fascinating team to watch. I think there's a lot of interesting things that we could see happen as the Oilers react to their conference final loss and do their best to kind of make some steps forward to have another shot at making it that far and hopefully getting on to a cup final, winning the Western Conference. But first, we're going to recap the 21-22 season, take a look at how things went. We're going to examine their salary cap space, take a look at their expiring contracts, and then try our best to answer the top burning questions facing this franchise during the offseason. So first up, let's recap the 21-22 season. As we know, like I said, they just were eliminated from the Stanley Cup Playoffs. They lost 4 straight, so they were swept in the Western Conference Final by the Colorado Avalanche. Of course, prior to that, we saw them have a long, grueling series against the Los Angeles Kings where they won in 7 games. Then they went on to win the Battle of Alberta in round number 2, defeating the Calgary Flames in 5 games, but then falling short to the Avalanche. Prior to that, they had a 104-point regular season. They finished with a record of 49, 27, and 6. They scored 285 goals for 7th best in the league, so very respectable on that front. They allowed 251 against for 18th best, so not too bad, but it could stand to be a little bit better. Power play was excellent, of course, with guys like McDavid and Draisaitl out there. You should expect that. 26% success rate for the 3rd best in the league. Penalty killing was okay, but again, just like the goals against, could be a little bit better. Had a 79.4% success rate for 17th best. So obviously the defensive metrics here with the goals against and the PK, slightly below average in the NHL. They could stand to get a little better. It was quite an eventful season. We can say the least. I mean, if you look back, I know for Oilers fans, it's probably difficult right now to take a lot of positives when your team just lost, especially losing 4 straight in the conference final. But they accomplished a lot this year. A lot of good work was done. And I think at some point when it's doable here, they should all celebrate that. I mean, we looked at a point back at about the halfway point of the season, it wasn't even a guarantee that the Oilers were going to make the playoffs. They ended up firing head coach Dave Tippett. They bring in Jay Woodcroft. They played 700 hockey under him the rest of the way. So obviously that was a good move. They brought in Evander Kane as an unexpected free agent partway through the season. Ends up playing about half the year, 43 games, scored 22 goals and 39 points. That's almost a point per game, which is a really successful rate. In 15 playoff games, he scores 13 goals. At one point, he had scored a goal per game. The last couple of games to wrap things up, he was not able to score. And of course, the final game of the season, game 4 against the Avalanche, he ended up being suspended, so was not in the lineup. But very, very successful signing, bringing him in on an offensive standpoint. Of course, Leon and Connor McDavid had a playoff for the ages, considering they only made it to 4 games in round 3. McDavid put up 33 points. Leon had 32. I mean, that's absolutely insane and amazing numbers. I mean, we've seen other people do those kind of metrics before, but it's not common, and usually they're all the way to the cup final before they can do that. So to do it in the amount of games they had, over 2 points per game, was simply amazing. Of course, their regular season was the same, with McDavid putting up 123 points and Draisaitl 110. Of course, Leon playing through the playoffs on one leg, basically. And we also learned that Darnell Nurse, their top defenseman, was playing with a torn hip flexor. So obviously banged up, bruised to say the least, but this team had a lot of success. Like I said, early on, they had their moments where they started good. They had a really bad stretch. There was a lot of uncertainty. They changed the coach. Things really took off the last, probably 30 games or more. And then from there, they had a strong finish, got up into the top 3 consistently here in the Pacific Division, won a couple of rounds. To me, that's a very successful season. But they have a lot of work to do, a lot of questions. A lot of things need to be answered and figured out here with GM Ken Holland at the helm. Now, before we figure out all his questions, let's look at the salary cap space he's working with here. Of course, they have 15 NHL contracts already on the books for a total of $75.369 million. Now, of course, that number doesn't all include the 15 contracts. It also has some dead cap space in there as well, because they do have some money on the books still for the James Neal buyout, which is $1.9 million for another 3 years, and the Andrej Sekera one as well, which has one more year left at 1.5. Plus, they have retained money on the Milan Lucic contract. When that Lucic for Neal trade went down, they had $750,000 retention on Lucic. So now, of course, that whole Neal Lucic thing, you're still kind of paying for both players. You know, they traded Lucic with retained money for Neal between Calgary and Edmonton, which is not something you see very often. And then Neal didn't end up staying very long before he was bought out. So he did have one good season there, but certainly they do have some dead space totaling over $4 million, which certainly hurts. But I guess to offset that, they do have the Oscar Klefbom contract, which is going to be on LTIR or LTIR eligible for just over $4 million as well. The numbers almost offset each other perfectly, so at least they can spend above the cap by that amount if they need to, and to still be cap compliant. So that dead space in a way is not as bad, but if they didn't have that dead space and they had the LTIR, they could spend more on players instead of having it be dead space. But at least it's there to offset for at least one more season. After this season, of course, the Lucic money and the Sekera money will come off, and it'll just be down to 1.9 for the Neal contract for 2 more years. So that gives them just over $7 million available, which is not a lot of money to work with. And they have a fair bit of contracts that need to be figured out, and some big ones too. So now let's take a look at that, because that's going to really give us a lot of the information and ammo that we need for them to work on. Who are their RFAs and UFAs this offseason? Now, the RFA side of things is not too complicated. They've got 3 players with Ryan McLeod, Jesse Puljujarvi, and Kyler Yamamoto. Now, here's the thing. Ryan McLeod, I have no doubt, will get a qualifying offer and he'll get signed. Between Puljujarvi and Yamamoto, I kind of wonder if one of them may or may not be back. We'll have to talk about that in the next segment. But I think they're at a point where I wouldn't be shocked, because we've heard Elliot Friedman say that there's some RFAs, and there's a bunch of them around the league that teams are just not sure about. And because of the arbitration eligibility and the walkaway figure, because if our arbitration awards a contract up to, I think it's 4-point-something million, you can choose to walk away, and then they become a UFA. And they don't really want to go down that road a lot. So we're going to see probably a bunch of decent RFAs not get qualified this year. And I wouldn't be shocked if Jesse Puljujarvi was one of them. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but because of the tight cap, I do wonder. I do wonder what Ken Holland's going to do in that regard. Yamamoto was certainly a bit more productive, so I think if the two of them, if only one gets qualified between the two, I would suggest he would be the guy. On the UFA side of things, of course, you have the newly acquired Evander Kane, Josh Archibald, Derek Brassard, Colton Seaver, Kyle Turris, newly acquired Brett Kulak, Chris Russell, and Mikko Koskinen. Now, we already know Mikko Koskinen is not coming back. He's heading to play in Europe. We've already seen confirmation of a contract that he was getting over there, so he's on his way out. Of course, many of those UFAs probably won't be back. I don't think guys like Brassard, Seaver, Turris, I don't think there's any interest there. Chris Russell's obviously aging. I don't really know if there'll be interest there. Obviously, there's going to be interest to bring back Kane, I would think. And I would think Brett Kulak to be interest too. But it will be tricky, of course. So we'll see. But let's now examine those questions, the big ones facing this team, and what might the answers be. That's the hard part here. But what are the top burning questions facing the Oilers this offseason? Well, first and foremost, I think the easiest piece of business that they can take care of, and it is a question, but I don't think it's a big question, is the coaching situation. They hired Jay Woodcroft to replace Dave Tippett as the interim coach. So does he get a full-time job promotion with the contract extension? I would think he would. I mean, we took a team here that when he took over that was not even guaranteed to be in the playoffs, and they had a good, strong finish and won a couple of rounds and got to the conference final. Like I said, his record was around .700 winning percentage. It's really good. I see no reason why Ken Holland would not want to extend him and give him the full-time position, and I would expect that to be fairly quick, you would think. I think that's a piece of business that they can take care of quickly and shouldn't be too much debate over. The next one, Evander Kane, is by far, when it comes to the players, the biggest question mark, in my opinion, is Evander Kane or his goaltending. It's kind of almost a tie for importance there. Now, with Evander Kane, things can get very interesting because I think there's going to be interest to bring him back. That much I think, can safely say. I know some people question whether maybe they'd feel differently after the suspension and the fact he wasn't there in Game 4. I don't think one slip up like that's going to cause them to walk away from a player that was extremely productive. I don't know what he was like in the room, but we never heard any rumblings about any issues. So I would think that, things went well in that regard. But here's the other thing to keep in mind with Evander Kane is his grievance with the San Jose Sharks is not over. And a lot of that was basically put on hold because he was busy playing with the Oilers every second night in the playoffs. Now that the season is done for them, that's going to probably pick back up here. And I don't know when we'll have a decision, but it should be ahead of free agency. But Kane, it's possible that they could rule as an arbitrator that his contract be reinstated. Ultimately, if they rule that the Sharks basically wiped out his contract illegally, then they could very well reinstate it, and he could theoretically be a member of the San Jose Sharks. I've heard Elliot Friedman talk about this here just as recently as today. He has mentioned it one other time as well. There's some that I thought maybe it'd be just more of a case of about money, that essentially they could say, no, the Sharks didn't have the right to terminate the contract, and they're going to pay him some money. But typically, when we've seen anything like that before, that usually comes with a cap penalty. So I would think that for his contract to be paid, that it would have to be reinstated. So Friedman goes on the possibility that it actually might be in the Oilers' best interest if it happened this way, because he had 3 more years at $7 million, right? So if the contract gets reinstated and he becomes a San Jose Shark again, then what he's saying is that the Sharks could then, or it could be deemed that they have a cap penalty of some sort, which is going to be the same idea. Maybe they trade him to Edmonton with retained money, and they knock that number down to like $4 million or $3.5 or something to that effect. Because if the Sharks are going to give a penalty basically for terminating his contract when they didn't have the right to do so, if it comes to that, then that could benefit Edmonton that way. And I'm not sure what would all be involved in the trade. Probably not a lot, but it's something that maybe the Oilers could send the Sharks a draft pick of some sort or something small just for getting him at a cheaper price. Because, that way Kane gets to make his $7 million. The Oilers don't get locked up too long to a Kane contract just because there is some risk there with the player because of the history, and they get him at a much cheaper price that would be a lot more affordable. That would be, to me, a blessing for the Oilers, but I'm not convinced that's going to happen. We don't know. If they determine that the Sharks had the right to do that, he'll have to be renegotiated just like everybody else, and he had production that was justifying a good salary. He could very well ask for $7 million again, and as much as the Oilers want to keep him, it's going to be tough to do if that's what they got to pay him. So we'll see where that goes. I think the interest is there, but because of the circumstances, we don't know how it's going to work out yet, and it could be a really complicated scenario that he ends up back in San Jose, traded back to Edmonton or something like that. Either way, I would think that the Edmonton Oilers are going to want to bring him back, and it's going to be complicated to figure it out. But he did really well there. Now, goaltending. Are they running next year with Mike Smith and Stuart Skinner? Stuart Skinner is no longer waivers exempt. So for him to go to the minors next year, they would have to go through waivers. They would be at risk to lose him. So, do they want to run with that? Are they comfortable with that? Do they want to go a different route? They have Mike Smith for 1 more year at $2 million. Koskinen's done and gone. I think that for Mike Smith, I think he can still play. Obviously, he has his moments, when he does his Mike Smith things and creates some moments for us on TV. But at the same time, he's been really good too. And, you got to live with the risk that you take. But at the same time, if he's, maybe more of a backup goaltender or splitting the duties more, then maybe, you can manage that a little bit better with his age and everything like that. But is Skinner ready to be a full-time goalie that's going to be able to play at least half the schedule? I don't know. I know he's a quality young goaltender that they have confidence in, but do they have that much confidence? Or do they consider some kind of trade? There's not much in free agency. There is a little bit, but nothing too high quality. They could explore Darcy Kemper if he doesn't go back to Colorado. There's Marc-Andre Fleury. I'm not sure that Fleury would be wanting to go there. There's a lot of speculation he wants to either stay in Minnesota or go to Pittsburgh, but we'll see about that. Kumper, there was a connection between the Oilers and Kumper before. When Colorado traded for him, apparently the Oilers were in the mix there too. So they got to figure something out, and I'm not sure that the duo of Smith and Skinner is going to help them get over this hump and try to build on what they have this year and take it a step further. So we'll see. But they're going to need some salary cap space first and foremost before they do a lot of this stuff. And Ken Holland doesn't have much of it. $7 million to try to figure out those two questions that we just answered alone is almost impossible. So what might they do here? Like when it comes to cap casualties, well, a couple things come to mind. A guy like Warren Fogle, I don't think his salary justifies what he brings, especially production-wise. I can see Warren Fogle being a trade chip, basically a cap dump. I could see Zach Kassian being moved. I mean, really, for what he gives you as well. Would a team like Arizona maybe take Kassian? I'm not sure. But another one that's making a little bit more money too, to me, is expendable, is Tyson Barrie. Tyson Barrie went to the Edmonton Oilers as their opportunity to run their power play and be their offensive defenseman, and he's done a decent job with that. But Evan Bouchard is basically taken over that. He plays most of the power play one spots and is capable of being that guy for less money. So to me, Tyson Barrie is almost like a luxury they can't afford. He's still a good defenseman. I think he can still give you 40, 45 points from the back end. He's still good in that regard. At the very least, if you don't have him on power play 1, you have him on power play 2. Like he's a good player, a useful player. He's not making a ton of money. He's making like 4.5 or something like that. But like I said, they have Bouchard who can do the same thing for less. So I think he's the luxury they can't afford. So a guy like Barrie might have to be expendable. So if you move those 3 players, now you're looking at you've just freed up almost $10 million, right? So if you get Barrie making like over 4, Kassian over 3, Fogle 2 something, we're in that $10 million neighborhood now. That would you don't even need a lot in return because you can replace a lot of those with ELCs now, because the Oilers, as much as they've been they haven't been picking super high, they got some good prospects and guys that I think can step in at least a couple next year. I mean, you saw Dylan Holloway make his debut in Game 4, didn't play a lot, but it was a good experience for him. He should be able to make that roster next year. The only reason he didn't get more opportunity this year is because he was injured so much. Carter Savoy, another fly under the radar prospect to me, is really, really good. I could see Savoy getting a chance next year. They have Xavier Bourgault, who's having a heck of a playoff in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. I don't know if he's going to be NHL ready for a full-time spot, but I could see him at least getting some games next year. You still got Benson, for example. I'm not sure really where things stand there. Raphael Lavoie. They have a decent group of prospects. If they could get a couple of those guys to be full-time roster spots with like a Ryan McLeod, then that could really help them save some money. And like I said, I don't think Puljujarvi and Yamamoto both come back. I think maybe, I don't know if they don't qualify Puljujarvi. Do they consider a trade? I don't know what route they go here. But Jesse has been good since he's come back. I think it's good for the Oilers and for him that he came back to the NHL. But at this point, I think it might be better to move on. And we'll see. But like I said, Yamamoto, again, at least he get 20 goals this year. I think he's worth keeping around, but it won't cost you a ton of money. But if they can get Kane through the Sharks, if that works out, that would save them some money too. But like I said, if you can create some cap space by moving some guys out, and then with what you have already, then you can make things work. I don't think they need to do a whole lot. I think bringing back Brett Kulak would be good. Clearly, the big difference here between the Oilers and the Avalanche is the Avalanche were just a bit deeper. So I think look at the high-end skill of the Oilers versus the high-end skill of the Avalanche. The big difference there is that the Avalanche defend better. Makar and Taves dictated a lot of those games. You can play them together, you can play them apart, so that one of them's always on the ice, and they really controlled the tempo of most of those games. So to me, I think Edmonton could work on their depth, and they could certainly work on maybe being a little bit better defensively, but I'm not sure they're going to get better defensively by not really changing much on the back end and at the same time going with Skinner and Smith. So I think they need to make some additional changes there, but we will see. They're going to be a fascinating team to watch. See what Ken Holland tries to do to help get them to the next step. Let me know your thoughts on the Oilers offseason, and we'll discuss further in the comments. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.